I will willingly move to open the continued public hearing on the MBTA zoning bylaw amendments.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Mr. Boissy,
Aye.
Mr. English,
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence. Oops, looks like he froze.
No, he
Come
said
back.
aye, I heard him.
Oh, okay, sorry. Mr. Maloney,
Aye.
Mr. Ortman,
Aye.
Mr.
I'm having
Aye.
trouble hearing you.
Yeah, you
Aye.
just your audio just faded out a little, Mike.
I might have-
Really?
Yeah,
Can you hear me okay now?
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I think Mr. Orban,
Aye.
Mr. Woodhams,
Aye.
Mike McKnight, aye. 7 in favor, no one opposed, motion carries. So Rachel, Jim and Chuck and I went through and we had Mr. Inneman in attendance and we had
Joanna McFarland.
Joanna McFarland from, but she was not representing EDC last night. So fairly small group. We went through and we talked about different aspects of this. Many of them were kind of clarifications, and I think we had some really interesting discussions. And Rachel is going to go off and try to clarify some things around if we use the town center zoning at 8 acres, at 8 units per acre, and we use 25 acres of that, we have to bring 25 acres worth of development someplace else. What does that really mean? Because when you do the math, it actually comes out to not an average of 15 units per acre. It comes out to less, because when you do the mathematics of it, 750 less the reduction we get for using the mixed use development, and then 8 units per acre on that, and then you end up with a net of 363,
363.
and you need 25 acres. If you do that math, you come out with 11 units an acre, or 14 units an acre, something like that. And so we're getting clarification on exactly what that math is, because if we can guarantee that that development won't be any more than 8 units per acre as a mixed use, and we can get the benefit of the reduction, then then it will be consistent with what the developer is going to bring forward to us when they come before us next. Clarification on that is, what's that math? Because technically you're supposed to average out to 15, and when you do the math with the reduction, you can't average. It's just physically impossible to average out to 15, because it's not 750 units, it's 563 minus the 200 that you're going to use at the town center. A little complicated, but we need clarification on that to make sure that we can get a benefit and we're not going to get some negative from using that land, and making sure that we can control at the town center that it's not more than 8 units per acre ever in any development, or anybody who brings something forward if this one doesn't go forward. So did I capture at least the town center zone appropriately?
I would say yes.
And really based on that answer, I would say, a lot of other of the different possible options fall out from that. So, we did discuss combinations and permutations, but until we have that answer and we know we're running the math the correct way, we could do a lot of work that would wind up needing to be redone. I think that's what we came to. Is that fair to say, Mike?
I would agree with that. I think what we did say was, let's explore the benefits or what might be negatives of, if that in fact plays out the way we want, we have to take 25 acres someplace else. Do we do that as 25 acres? Do we do that as 2 10s and a 5? Do we do it as 5 5s? And there's some benefits and things that I think we have to, benefits, pros and cons that we have to evaluate on what would we do with the balance of that land and where would we put it? So maybe for the board's thinking, if in fact we had to make up or use up 25 more acres, what is it? And we had to put, it's really 25 acres and 363 units. How would we do that? Would we break it up into 5 5-acre spots and put them throughout the town so that the disruption or the impact is kind of watered down. It's not on one street. It's not in one development. It's not in one place in town. Or would it be better to do one development someplace? We also talked about some of the pros and cons of, or some of the pros and cons of things like the outlets, which might be a very easy thing to permit and get done, but may put a strain on Route 1A coming into the center of town, which that road, maybe cannot handle as much traffic as would be if we put it out at the outlets, the rest of those units. We talked about, I think the idea that was brought up was the Abbey. We think that might be a stretch because West Wrentham may or may not be the right place to put a development like this, but worthy of consideration. And so there is a list, and we've started the list of pros and cons on the different sites that are available to us, as well as the different sizes we might want to consider with the balance of those acres as we move forward. So kind of more food for thought in terms of thinking about how could we make this the least impact to the town in terms of either traffic, noise, infrastructure improvements, things like that. So one of the things that we talked about was that may make some sense. If you do one development at 25, you're using the same setbacks in that 25 acres as you would if you use 5-acre developments. So those all setbacks are the same distances, but probably impact the development on 5 acres more than they do on 25. So if we want to lessen the number of units that could potentially be built here and still meet, then maybe those smaller pieces might allow us to keep the unit count down and yet still meet the intent of the law. So I don't know, those are just some thoughts we were throwing around, pros and cons on each of the sites, thinking about what might be good for the town, what might not be good for the town. If we're going to do this, how could we have a benefit to the town if we come up with an idea? How could this benefit the town wherever we're going to put it? So other than that, we didn't come to a conclusion other than we have some work to do around what we just talked about on the calculations and the verification of all that. And then a discussion about how do you parse that out, the remaining balance of acres if town center is viable. So I don't know, Mr. Jim Lawrence or Chuck Woodhams, anything else, or Rachel?
Nothing else for me.
No, I think that sums it up pretty well. I know we had discussed the timing of everything. If we're going to do the mandatory mixed use, we have to do the 90-day pre-approval with the state, which puts us at probably our next meeting, August 7th. I don't know if we've confirmed when town meeting is, but we have to give them 90 days. So by next meeting, we need to have something to vote on. And I know that there had been discussion last night about having another subcommittee meeting, at least one more between now and our next meeting. We haven't scheduled that, but I would be in favor of doing that because I think we're getting down to the wire and we need to come up with a definitive plan. And if we're going to include other areas, Rachel needs the time to work those out through the formulas to make sure that they comply.
There's also discussion about whether or not, and I don't know how we get this answer, Rachel. We talked about it last night, but we didn't come to a conclusion. What happens if we don't meet that deadline? Can we still submit for pre-approval, even if we're in violation of not getting to the end of the year with a plan? So I don't know if there's somebody who can counsel us on, on this stuff, because I think it's in our best interest, or my opinion is, it's in our best interest to understand what some of these what's happening with some of these litigation before we go and put a plan in that may not be the best thing for the town. So in the conversations I've had, with some of the select board, it's, okay, if we don't meet it and we're in violation, I don't sense a huge, like, we got to get there and we got to get this done, because if we're in violation, that's dramatic, for the town. I don't get that. We lose some grants, right? We lose some mass work grants maybe, but I don't think we have a lot of need for those right now. So there's some question about the timing and whether or not we should let this play out a bit before we put a final plan into play and get it before town meeting. But that's conversations and anecdotal conversations that I'm hearing and I've had. So something else to consider, do we try to rush it through in next meeting, or do we say, okay, we're gonna let this play out a little bit, and we're gonna see what happens really with some of these lawsuits, see if this is in fact legal, or is an unfunded mandate, as I've heard from others, including the town manager. So.
Well, I've stated it before and I'll state it again. I think we as a board would be irresponsible to do that. I think we need to put something forward, and if the town chooses to not vote for it, then that's up to them. And if the select board advises town meeting not to vote on it, that is up to them as well. Given, I'm hesitant to say we should wait and see what happens with the lawsuits. They may not be settled anytime soon. Meanwhile, we've taken no action. So now we are directly in non-compliance. Whereas if we come up with a plan, we've at least done our due diligence, and maybe even if it's not approved, even if we get it through town meeting, but it doesn't get approved by the state, we've at least made a good faith effort to try to comply, and that might buy us some time to tweak whatever we come up with beyond December 31st. Problem with waiting for lawsuits is if the lawsuits settle and this is all found to be perfectly legal, now we've got nothing, and now we're in non-compliance, and almost defiantly so. And I think that's a bad look for the town, and I think that's going to put us under a microscope. And we have the option to put through a plan, and in 3 months after the plan is approved by town meeting, a lawsuit is heard and a judge says, no, this is unconstitutional. The state may not do this. This law is deemed unconstitutional and it's null and void. We have the option as a town, call a special town meeting, go back and rescind our vote, undo what we did. We put the overlay district in, they find that it's unconstitutional. We have the option to go back and vote to remove that overlay district after the fact. I don't want to play chicken with the state. I think that's a bad idea.
Certainly respect that and all opinions on this. I would hate for us to put something in that isn't the right thing for the town, and then find out we have to unwind it after some developers already put a plan in and locked in the zoning. So I understand we as a planning board have this in our charter to do, but I think we also have options. We could put something forward tomorrow and take no action on it, put it before town, if it's not the right plan. So I'd leave that as an option for people too, that if we really don't think we've got the right plan, we don't have the right information. I mean, we came up with some new information last night, and this thing's been going on for 3 months. So the more we learn, the more we know, the better we understand what the options are, what's right for the town, what should we put before the town. If we don't have a really good handle on that, then I'd be ultra cautious as a planning board to put anything in writing that we want to have approved that isn't right, or put something in front of people that we're thinking is just good enough to get, this passed, and then try to change it or rescind it later after some developer's already locked in the zoning on it. So I think it's a big decision for us, And it has taken time, and, you know, we can say we've had it for 3 years, but, you know, if you listen to the select board's meetings, and it's not their purview, but it is their town, right? We voted them in as the select board, and I can tell you that there isn't a lot of interest in, you know, moving this thing if we're not aligned on the right way to do this for the town. That's not going to hurt us long term. And so bringing something forward, bringing something forward and us maybe not taking action on it means that we're not fully decided on what is the right thing for the town, and bring it forward before town meeting with that vote of no action allows the town and the select board and everybody else to have the conversation without us saying, this is what we think is absolutely the best and right plan for this town, knowing all the facts and all the information, because I still can't find the right mixture of things to do that don't hurt this town long term if we have to put in 750 or 563 units, and again, it's not absolutely well thought out and correct. So other comments? Why don't we go down the list? Mr. Belasi.
Yeah, I think Chuck put it well. I think we don't know what will happen. You know, the state, I feel that I haven't heard any good legal arguments for why the state can't do this. They require towns to make other zoning decisions like 40B and various other things. So why can't they require this? But I'm not a lawyer, so I really don't know. And I just think it's up to the people of Wrentham. We need to bring something for them to vote on. So that's it.
Okay, Mr. English.
Well, I've been not a big fan of this since it arrived. And, you know, at the risk of repeating what has been said, an unfunded mandate, but it's missing a lot of pieces to really serve the spirit of what I believe is its intent. So my position right now would be no action. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
I feel similarly to Chuck. I feel we should come up with an option, and I also think it's fine for us to come up with an option and recommend no action, because
That's no, just fine.
there are, I don't know who else is speaking. It's fine with us to come up for an option for the town to vote on and recommend negative action, because we've heard that there may be this problem or that problem, but not to give the town something to vote on. I would not feel good about that. And if it comes to a vote, I won't vote for that. I'm complete.
Okay. Mr. Maloney.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I have a question on the math. May I ask that now?
Sure.
Okay. If we use the downtown, the Village Zone B, we're talking about, I think, 25 acres. Does that mean we're carving out a piece of Village Zone B, which is 47 acres plus?
I believe, Rachel, we're putting the overlay on 25 acres of that, correct? Which
there were several splices discussed at the subcommittee meeting last night. I'm not entirely sure I wrapped my head around all of them. I believe that was one of the questions or that you had, of putting 25 acres of an overlay over that area. But that was never anything that was part of what I studied. So that would need some more information. I will say I did find out some more, and I was able to find out clarification on the mandatory mixed use. And in the long run, it actually doesn't really help that much. Because yes, you still have to come up with that 50 acres. You still have to do the 15 units per acre. Even though you've got a reduction, you still have to have those two things. And so essentially it ends up being in a reduction of only 24 units. And I was like, that's not how you guys really, that's not how this sounded when it was being explained. So the mandatory mixed use doesn't really seem to be worth it from what I've heard and talked to people about on that.
Well, this confuses the matter further because when back in February, we talked about including Village Zone B and ending up with 563 units rather than 750. But actually, before we get to that though, we're going to be talking to people tonight about the proposal down there. It's going to be it's going to be 347 units in total, plus possibly more from an
Yeah,
indeterminate.
that has a public hearing. So, and that we haven't opened that public hearing. So I'm just going to caution going too deep into discussing that.
Yeah.
That site.
We can, yeah, we have to keep these separate a bit in detail.
Okay, very good. Well, whatever we do, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it would be wise to walk into town meeting and say, here's a plan, we don't endorse it. So, I mean, what you do is you walk in and you say, look, if you wish to comply with this poorly drafted bylaw and the guidelines, this is the best plan we think is least disruptive to the town and observes the letter of the law. Okay, so we endorse it on the grounds that it's the best we can do in a bad situation. Whatever that is, whether it's Village Zone B or it's the outlets or it's 5x5 or whatever it is. So I don't think going in and saying, well, here's a plan, we don't endorse it. That's a bad look for this board. As for the timing of it, I don't agree that we don't have to submit the pre-approval. But Mr. Woodhams is right. If you're going to submit it, you got to do it fairly soon. But you can go to town meeting without having submitted a pre-approval and have town meeting endorse, approve a plan that we think is the best thing, send it to the state and let them say what they want about it. I mean, in the end, what can they do? They can withhold funds for certain grant programs, most of which I don't know how many of which we're even involved with anyway. So I think there's one or two that we would like to have handing to us in the case of future developments, like the one we're going to discuss tonight. But so I'm fine with going forward in the fall with a plan saying, look, we've done our job here. If you wish to settle this matter now, town meeting, here is the best plan. Here's what we think is the best plan. Vote against it, vote for it, amend it, do whatever you want. And if the select board wants to delay the whole thing and town meeting agrees with them, then we'll delay it. But we've at least done our job.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the timing on the pre-approval was because of the mixed-use development. If we don't go in there, then that pre-approval, we still have to get well, we still can get pre-approval, but the timing was related to being out of compliance because of the timing related to if we were going to do the mixed-use development, Rachel, correct?
If we were going to do the mandatory mixed use, that is a mandatory 90-day pre-review.
Okay.
If you're just doing the traditional, that is an optional 90-day pre-approval.
Very good. I stand corrected then. Thank you, Rachel.
Yep. Okay.
All set.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Orban?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with some others here and think that we should put at least forward what we think is the best plan, even if we don't necessarily love the plan. We should at least give the people the best plan. My biggest concern with this is, I can speak similar to Alfred and that while I am attorney, I don't know what's going to happen, but everybody else I've spoken with doesn't feel good about the positions of the town and suspect that the Commonwealth's going to win. In the end, we never know. Obviously, things could change. My concerns with waiting are the briefing in the Milton case, at least, isn't due until September. The hearing's not going to be for a few months later. A decision's not going to be for a few months later. And then on top of that, if the act, meaning forcing us to do this, is okay, once that act's okay, they can change the punishment. They can make the punishment bigger. I mean, once they're allowed to do it, I would be concerned with them ultimately being able to say, okay, you're not worried about these 4 issues. Well, we're going to change the act. And now it's going to be also this, this, and this, and this, which I think once they're allowed to do it, if they are, that becomes a potential problem that we might be able to face and that they can just make the punishment harsher.
Okay. I guess maybe what would be helpful for the either the next meeting or if we can schedule, Rachel, another subcommittee meeting in between, is for people to share with Rachel your thoughts on what would be either the best plan or the least disruptive plan or the least impactful plan to the town, so that we have a view of all the options that you guys think we should be looking at, so that we can package that up and put pros and cons to them, and then make sure that we can bring something to the next meeting that says, here are the kind of the summary of the 5 ideas that are out there. Let's sit down in the next meeting and spend some time going through each one of them and saying, you know, what do we like about it? What don't we like about it? Is this something we want to consider moving forward to town meeting or not? Because I think there's a lot of there's probably more options that are out there than we've seen, and I think that's part of what I'm struggling with, is trying to wrap my head around each location and then figuring out the pros and cons of that as to the impact that will be felt by the town. So I guess if you guys could help us to slim down that list and put forward things that make sense to you, we can then look at it and bring forward to the next meeting, maybe a more refined discussion on what we want to do with that. Rachel, I'm guessing they have to send that to you, though. Don't share that around to 7 members of the planning board.
Correct, that, because that can be considered, it is considered a deliberation outside of a meeting.
Please just send that to Rachel and we'll take it up at a subcommittee. Hopefully we can set something up, Rachel. We'll talk about it before the end of the meeting for, well, I guess we have 3 weeks. I said 3 or 4 weeks between now and the next meeting. So we should be able to get a subcommittee meeting in.
It's the only way I get you guys to come and see me. So, yeah.
It was a hybrid meeting too. Very impressive in and on computer. So any other, this is a public hearing. Any public comment on this topic of MBTA communities?
Mr. Chair, before we do that, if I could just add a couple more thoughts.
Sure.
Given what Rachel just said about the reduction and it not really being what we thought the reduction was going to be, that puts a whole different spin on it for me as far as deadline. Because if my only reason for wanting to go with the mandatory mixed use was to get the reduction in significant reduction in units, which puts us under the gun for the April 7th or the August 7th. I'm sorry. If we are not going to get a reduction of several hundred units and instead are going to only be 24, I say I'm not even worried about doing the mandatory mixed use, which means we don't need to do the 90 days. So I'm fine with taking more time, because I don't think we should bother with the mandatory mixed use. We're not going to get the bang for the buck that we thought we were going to get. And the only other thing was that to Mr. Orban's point about them changing the rules. Yes, the original legislation talked about 4 different grants that the town would be ineligible to apply for. Since then, there have been discussions, as I understand it, of an additional 13 funding, up to I think 13 funding
penalties.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
Programs,
right.
13, yeah.
An additional 13 potential sources of funding that the town would be ineligible for, that are part of the guidelines. And yes, the guidelines were not part of the original wording of the law, but the wording of the law allowed the EOHLC to develop guidelines. So basically, they said these things are definite, and then whatever the EOHLC says is also going to be considered part of that law. I know they're trying to challenge that part of it, but as Mr. Bouassi said, you know, there are things that the state already mandates that the town do with its zoning, 40B being the most significant. So yeah, they've been moving the goalposts on this for the last 3 years, and there's no reason to think that they won't continue to do so. But I just, from my perspective, I'm not worried about the pre-approval. So if we need to take more time and do this right, I'm fine with that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Woodhams. I mean, if we could find a home run, right, where this is not impactful, where it's a benefit to the town, and that might be a site that's needs to get fixed up, cleaned up, or is in the right part of town for this to be sitting, or it's spread out so it's not an impact on certain roads. If we could find that right mixture of criteria and benefit, it would be great. And
Agreed.
maybe we put it in that context with, let's look at options and try to figure out where options are, where this could work. And we'd get more benefit than we would impact. Something to think about. Any other comments from the planning board before we move to public comment?
Just real quick, there's other things we can also, I've seen required that could benefit the town. Some have required recreation space, that sort of thing in these zones. I don't really fully understand how that impacts the density requirements, like if you're requiring recreation space, but it could benefit the town in that way as well. Just wanted to point that
That's
out.
a good point. And we did talk about this last night, that if we're going to have larger development versus smaller ones, the criteria that would have to be written that we'd want to have in that development has to be pretty thorough, and we'd have to make sure that we get, that could be a benefit piece, right? Whatever it is that we're going to require as part of that development that gets the town or the residents or local, whatever it is, something as part of putting in all these units, we'd have to think very carefully about how we would write that into, especially, I think, a larger development versus a smaller, smaller development. So something else.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just one question. I'm sorry, the technical matter, maybe you or Rachel can answer this. If we went to town meeting with a zoning bylaw change, such as, to satisfy the 3A, and we offered no endorsement and it was defeated, wouldn't that mean we could not come back with the same plan for 2 years? But if we did endorse it, we could bring it back. Even if it gets defeated, we could bring it back, say, 6 months later. Is that do I understand the bylaw correctly on that?
If a development gets defeated, it certainly is a 2-year waiting period if they don't withdraw without prejudice. I don't know if that's the case on zoning bylaws, Rachel. I don't know that fits in the same category.
If it's defeat, you can't bring it forward unless the planning board puts it back on and makes, has a new hearing process and makes a different recommendation. But also, no recommendation is considered a negative recommendation. So if you say we have no opinion, that there's case law out there that says that is considered a negative.
And why do we have 3 options?
You don't have 3 options. You have positive or negative.
Okay. I was under a different impression that we had 3 options to vote on: positive, recommendation, no recommendation, or or negative recommendation. To me, negative and taking no action are 2 different things. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, I provided in the handout last night. If you just want to take a look at that, read through it, and if you have any other questions, we can go through that. I know I don't want to hold up the next too much.
Okay.
I do see Leo has had his hand up for a little bit.
Yes, Mr. Inman, please name and address, please.
Leo Imminent, 650 East Street. I was going to make 2 points. The one point Mr. Maloney just made, and that is, if the planning board failed to give a positive recommendation and the town meeting defeated the zoning bylaw, the bylaw says that it shall not reoccur before town meeting for a period of 2 years. To me, this would be a very bad situation, because I don't know how you get around state law. I mean, if we're in non-compliance and now we can't fix it for 2 years, we've really dug ourselves a deep hole. So it's important for us to find something that seems reasonable and approve it. So that was my first point. My second point is, when we pick these sites, please be aware of the time and requirements you're putting on your town planner. We had Bola Engineering do this work for us. It turns out the state has put together an extensive spreadsheet to go through the process. So each particular site has to be looked at in terms of whether it's publicly owned, whether there's a water body or a wetland, any environmental restrictions, whether there's any protected open space, are there any rights of way, and there's any land for institution or education. And all this has to be done one lot at a time. So if we select 5 different sites, each containing 4 to 5 lots in them, there's considerable time and effort being placed on the staff of the town of Wrentham Planning Department. That time and staff is not going to be available for many of the other issues that are currently before the planning board. So I will be careful that we don't do too much delving into various other options. And I just want to make sure you're aware of the consequences of any such decisions we make as a town. Thank you, Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Inman. Anyone else before we close this hearing for the, or
Yeah.
continue this hearing?
Yeah, forgive me, Joe Stewart at 65 Hickory. I can't find the little, on this user experience, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. So my apologies for clicking the wrong button.
Nope, you're good. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So my first point has to do with, we expect you, the planning board, to figure this out and tell us what you think we ought to do. All right, so go figure it out and give us a plan and then let us go vote on it. The second thing, several of the planning board members noted that the state can pretty much has demonstrated the capacity to continue to make changes. So I have every confidence that they will. And in particular, the state legislature spent years negotiating before they succeeded in passing significant legislation relating to increasing housing in the state. So like that, the rule about if you're going to go with a high density housing, a high density housing zoning proposal, you don't have to get 2/3 vote by the town to pass it. I mean, those kinds of things were put forward by very conservative, economic-minded Republican people who knew that it was important to get housing built in the state. And it was bipartisan, got passed. It was specifically not line item vetoed by the Republican governor. And the people who went to work in preparing the initial regulations were all from that Republican policymaking team. So they did all of that work. So it's not like this is, I mean, the fundamental thing is we want to get more housing built. And then I think the third thing I wanted to share was a way to think about a very common concern that some people raise having to do with the impact on schools. As you no doubt know, maybe not in detail, but you have a good sense, over the past 30 years, the years that I've been here, round numbers, we've built 2,000 bedrooms. And those additional 2,000 bedrooms did not produce an avalanche of students. So the reason I share this is that we actually have declining enrollment, but we need to have housing. So basically, I'm asking you guys and ladies to figure out a solid plan that's the best you can do, and then let us vote on it at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I think schools are one thing. I think infrastructure and road construction, traffic in the town, there's certainly a number of things that we have to take into consideration on the development of this. So I appreciate those comments. Any others from the public before we continue this to our next meeting? Rachel, do you see any hands?
No, I think everybody's eager to get on to Kendrick Street.
Good. Well, that's
Chairman?
next on our agenda.
Oh,
Do you need a motion to continue, Mr.
We
Chairman?
do. Does anybody
Motion
want to make?
continue the hearing until, Rachel, do you want to do it at our next meeting?
August 7th.
At
So moved.
7:15?
Second,
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
second,
Any discussion? Roll call vote, Mr. Boissy,
Aye.
Mr. English,
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence,
Aye.
Mr. Maloney,
Aye.
Mr. Orban,
aye.
Mr. Woodhams.
Aye.
Aye, 7 in favor,